It's my honor to interview Congressman Neal Smith today. He was the longest-serving congressman in Iowa history and is a great hero to a number of Democrats throughout the state. And it's a real pleasure to be able to ask him about his political career and find out a little bit about his life. Good to see you, Neal.
Good, glad to see you.
Neal, I don't know where to start with you, but I would kind of like just kind of lead you through your life a little bit and have you talk a little bit about things that you remember of significance. I know you were a World War II veteran, is that right?
Yeah.
What did you do in the service?
Well, I was in the Army Air Corps. Then you didn't have an Air Force, you had an Air Corps.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And were you posted overseas, or?
Yeah, I was in the Pacific for 18 months.
And what islands did you serve on?
Well, I started out in Australia, and I came home the day they moved to Okinawa.
Uh-oh.
So that's the whole, almost the whole thing. It was in May of 1945 I came home, and the war was over in August 16th. Yeah.
What was your job in the service?
Well, I was in B-24s. I don't really talk about my service.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But you actually were involved in some flights, I take it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I had two tours, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
When you got out of the military, did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Yes.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Missouri University and to Syracuse University, and then I went to law school, my wife and I together at Drake, and I lived right here at Fort Des Moines. Fort Des Moines had been a wax service area, and they turned the barracks into veterans housing, and we lived there 1 year, right here in Fort Des Moines. And we were committee man and committee woman there because it was new. It had been a federal property, so they had to pass a law that would permit the veterans to vote because they were on federal property. And then they didn't have a committee man and committee woman, so they appointed us committee man and committee woman.
And that was your first chance to do some organizational politics for the Democrats?
Yeah.
Before we leave law school, Bea going to law school was kind of she was a woman ahead of her time, is that right?
There were only 3 at the time, and then when we practiced law in Des Moines, there were only 3 women lawyers in Des Moines when we started practicing in 1950.
So she was a little bit of a pioneer then, right?
Yeah, she really was, and it was a lot of prejudice against women, including by some judges, not by all judges, and then some attorneys were irritable to women. Yeah, but she held up her own. She made them sorry that they tried to pick on her.
Were there very many Democrats in law school that you were able to make friends with?
Oh, yes. Well, what happened was I went down, we felt so strongly we were for Truman, and he wasn't supposed to have any possibility of getting elected. But we wanted to help anyway. So we went down to state headquarters, and I told him what I wanted to do, so he sent me to the county chairman, and that was Wade Clark. And Wade Clark said, well, we need a committee man and a committee woman out there. And so that's how we really got started on organization. Yeah.
Now these were all vets you were working with out where you were living, is that right?
Yeah. It was only a veterans project. They took the barracks and made 7 apartments out of each barracks out there. And we lived there for a year. And then I went door to door. And one of the things that was kind of interesting was that when we went door to door, well, to start with, Cunningham, who I was running against, he was an incumbent. He had helped get it because they thought, oh, those veterans, they'll all vote Republican, you know. But when I'd go door to door, well, I'd find out that they were Democrats. Most of them, they were raised during the Depression, you know. They were Democrats, and so we kept a list of which ones said they were Democrats, and then we made sure they voted on election day.
Did you have a chance to see Harry Truman during the campaign?
Yes, a little distance. He came to Dexter to a plowing match, we got there about 3 hours before it started so we could stand close to the gate, the stage, and then when it started, there weren't very many. I mean, no, that's not true. An hour before it started, there were very few people. Then when it started, I looked around and there was 40 acres of people out there. People were interested. And then he started his speech, and but they were still kind of unruly, you know, like people are in a big mob like that. And all at once he said, "They stuck a pitchfork in the farmer's back." Those were the very words he said, and the crowd quieted down. And people didn't realize, he came there on a train, and people didn't realize he was being heard. But the pollsters thought, well, there's no chance for anybody but Dewey. And so they quit taking polls 3 weeks before the election. And so then the election came along, and here is the, I've saved this, tells the whole story.
Yeah, it didn't quite turn out that way, did it?
It shocked them. It shocked them. The Chicago Tribune was a big paper, and they just assumed, well, he's got it in the bag, and but it turned out Truman won. Didn't know it until the next day sometime, but anyway, that's the way it went.
Now, you were working on kind of on the ground here in Iowa in support of him. Did you know that Truman was going to carry Iowa?
No, nobody thought he would. No one thought he would carry Iowa or the country. I mean, the pollsters had told us the election's over. Dewey is going to be elected. Yeah.
Do you have any idea why Iowa decided to go for Truman in such a large number?
It was like the country. We were after World War II. People remembered the Depression. Remember, we don't have people today that remember it, but they remember the Depression then, and they didn't want to go back to something different than what Roosevelt and Truman were doing. But it was not realized. People just assumed, well, they'd go back to being Republicans, you know. Yeah.
All right, so you graduated from law school in 1950, right?
1950.
And you worked as a prosecutor for a while, is that right?
1 year. 1 year. At the end of the first year, I didn't ask for the job, but Clyde Herring was running that primary, and Wade Clark had asked him to run against an incumbent Democrat, the second one in 100 years, because he didn't like what was going on. Wade wanted to be an honest party, wanted to be honesty in office, and he felt like that it had slipped. And so he asked Clyde Herring to run. And then when Clyde got elected, he asked me to be one of his 6 assistant county attorneys. But at the end of the first year, I had more clients than I could take care of in the office. I don't know, just luck. They walked in the door. And at the end of the first year, I quit and went full-time in law practice.
All right, let's talk a little bit about that. One thing you just mentioned was that Polk County had been a Republican county for a number of years, and it switched. And you were there for that, weren't you?
Yeah, this was the period when they switched. And what happened was that the Board of Supervisors they got involved in graft. The Republican Board of Supervisors. And so Wade and Schweitzer were partners, and Schweitzer ran for county attorney, got elected, and prosecuted him. And that also played into the 1948 election, but he prosecuted him. And so, yeah, that was important at that time. And then at that time, the city council, the city, was under the commission form of government. And under the commission form of government, you have a safety commissioner. The police department's under the safety commissioner. And so you had liquor by the drink, and you had at that time you had bootleggers and tie-up with Chicago, and that was all involved in the city. So you had the city and the county in bad shape, really. And so really kind of funny, I thought, the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, they were, of course, against liquor by the drink. And the big bootleggers were against liquor by the drink. And we thought that was kind of funny. They were all tied up together, and the Republicans were helping them both at the city level and at the county level. And so we thought that was kind of funny. But there happened to be right at the time, and there were wives mostly of returning veterans were in the women's organization. To get out the vote, well, not to get out the vote. What am I trying to say? The big women's organization, and they were against this commission form of government for that reason. So we joined, the Democrats then joined them and opposed and proposed changing the form of government. We changed it to what we have now, a nonpartisan government. It was partisan before. And so the Republicans controlled both the county and the city, and they used that control in the auditor's office for absentee ballots, and in registering people in the city of Des Moines. They controlled that at the city hall, and they did everything they could to keep people from registering to vote, and they did a pretty good job of it. They closed the registration 30 days before the election, and before that, the office was only open to register for 5 nights before it closed, and only from 4:30 till 8. And if you were in line at 8 o'clock, it's too bad you couldn't register. They just kept people from registering, is what they did. And so they were in the majority. Republicans were in the majority in Polk County and in the city, partly not because the majority of people really were, but because Democrats weren't voting. They weren't even getting registered to vote, and well, they were able to control it. And so graft and corruption helped Democrats at that time, but also it's all these returning veterans and a change of attitude. And I'd say this, the insistence of Wade Clark and Schweitzer and a relatively small group, that we have honest government. That was the motto, and we're going to have honest government, and that in the long run has really paid.